They thought it would be just another moment of humiliation, another quiet girl pushed to the floor while powerful people laughed, but the second the uniform touched the ground, the entire hall went silent in a way that felt almost frightening. She didn't cry at first, she didn't even look up, she just stared at the polished floor as if she had already expected this to happen, as if she had lived this moment 100 times in her mind before it became real. The woman in the beige suit kept pointing at her with that sharp, cold finger, the kind of finger that had probably fired people without blinking, the kind of finger that never apologized, and her voice was loud enough to echo between the marble walls, accusing, mocking, humiliating without mercy. The girl stayed on her knees, one hand inside the bag that had just been torn open, her shoulders trembling slightly but her face still calm, and the people standing behind the woman looked uncomfortable, yet none of them dared to say a word because power has a strange way of making good people silent. A security guard stepped closer as if he was waiting for a command, and the woman laughed softly and said the girl had no right to be there, no right to even stand in that building, and that her kind always tried to sneak into places they didn't belong. The words hurt more than the shouting, because they were said so casually, like the girl was not even a person. She slowly picked up a small notebook that had fallen out, then a folded photograph, then a pair of worn gloves, and every movement felt heavy, like each object carried something she was trying not to remember. Someone in the background whispered that she looked too calm for someone being humiliated, but nobody understood that silence is sometimes the only way a heart survives. The woman suddenly kicked the bag with her heel, sending the rest of its contents spilling across the floor, and that was the moment everything changed, because a dark green fabric slid out, thick and perfectly pressed, and it stopped right near the girl's knee. The room didn't react immediately, because at first it looked like just another piece of clothing, but then one of the men behind the woman leaned forward slightly, and his face turned pale in a way that made the others follow his eyes. The girl froze for a second, as if she wished the uniform had stayed hidden, as if she didn't want anyone to see it, and her fingers hovered over it but did not touch it yet. The woman noticed the sudden silence and frowned, clearly annoyed that the attention had shifted away from her voice, and she stepped closer, ready to continue humiliating the girl, but then she saw the gold stars on the shoulders. Her expression changed slowly, not with fear at first, but with confusion, like her mind was refusing to understand what her eyes were seeing. The girl finally picked up the uniform with both hands, carefully, almost gently, and brushed a small piece of dust from it like it was something sacred. She still didn't look up, but her breathing changed, slower now, steadier, as if holding that uniform gave her a quiet strength she had been hiding the entire time. Someone behind the woman whispered the word general, and the sound traveled through the hall like a crack in glass. The woman laughed nervously and said it had to be fake, because girls like her didn't carry things like that, girls like her didn't belong to families with power, and girls like her didn't deserve respect. The girl finally lifted her eyes, and there was sadness in them, deep and quiet, but there was also something stronger, something patient, something that had been waiting for this moment without rushing toward it. She spoke softly, almost like she didn't want anyone to hear, and she said the uniform didn't belong to her, it belonged to her father, and the moment she said that word, father, the entire hall felt smaller. She explained slowly that he had worn it every day with pride, that he had never asked for respect, only for honesty, and that he had taught her one thing before everything else, to stay calm when the world tried to break her, because real strength never shouts. The woman tried to interrupt, but her voice no longer sounded powerful, it sounded sharp and thin, like someone trying to hold onto control that was already slipping away. The girl continued quietly, saying her father had died 2 months ago, and that today was the first day she had found the courage to carry his uniform outside the house. The silence became heavy, and even the security guard lowered his eyes as if he suddenly felt ashamed of standing there. She said she came to the building because she had been invited for an interview, but she arrived early and didn't want to sit in the waiting area wearing something so important, so she kept it in her bag, hoping nobody would notice. Her voice never shook, but her hands trembled slightly while holding the uniform, and that small detail made the sadness feel real, deeper than any tears could show. The woman in the beige suit finally understood that the situation was no longer under her control, but arrogance does not disappear easily, and she tried to recover by saying that anyone could claim anything, that uniforms could be stolen, that stories could be invented. The girl nodded slowly, not angry, not defensive, just tired, and she pulled out the folded photograph she had picked up earlier. She held it up quietly, and in the photo there was a smiling man in the same uniform, standing next to a younger version of her, both of them laughing like nothing in the world could hurt them. One of the men behind the woman stepped forward and looked closely at the photo, and his face changed instantly, because he recognized the man. He whispered the general's name under his breath, and that name felt heavy in the air, like a truth nobody could ignore. The woman stepped back a little, her confidence cracking slowly, and the girl finally stood up, still holding the uniform with both hands like it was something alive. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't accuse anyone, she only said she never wanted respect because of her father's rank, she only wanted to be treated like a human being. The words were simple, but they hit harder than shouting ever could. The people in the hall began to look at the floor, at the scattered contents of the bag, at the girl who had stayed quiet while being humiliated, and something inside them shifted, because patience has a way of exposing arrogance without effort. The security guard bent down slowly and started picking up the items from the floor without being asked, and another man followed him, and then another, until the same people who had stood silent were now helping her gather everything back into the bag. The woman in the beige suit tried to say something again, but her voice no longer carried authority. It sounded like someone speaking from far away, someone who had already lost the respect she thought she owned. The girl placed the uniform back into the bag carefully, closed it gently, and looked around the hall one more time, not with anger, not with revenge, but with a quiet sadness that felt stronger than both. She said she would leave, because she didn't want a job in a place where dignity had to be proven with pain, and those words created a deeper silence than anything before. The man who had recognized the general stepped forward quickly and said she shouldn't go, that what happened was wrong, that the building had never seen something like this before, and his voice carried genuine regret. The girl hesitated for a second, and in that moment you could see the struggle inside her, the sadness still heavy, the helplessness still real, but also a quiet hope that maybe not everyone was the same. She didn't answer immediately, she simply stood there holding the bag close to her chest like a shield. The woman who had humiliated her was now completely silent, her arrogance replaced by something small and fragile, and the people behind her were no longer standing next to her, they had stepped away without realizing it. The man apologized again, not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly, and the girl finally nodded once, slowly, like she was forgiving them not because they deserved it, but because she refused to carry hatred with her. Someone brought her a chair, someone offered water, and the same hall that had felt cold and cruel a few minutes earlier now felt strangely human. She sat down quietly, still calm, still gentle, and for the first time her eyes filled with tears, not because she had been humiliated, but because she had endured it without losing herself. The justice didn't come with shouting, it didn't come with revenge, it came slowly, through silence, through patience, through the simple truth that real strength does not need to prove itself loudly. The woman in the beige suit walked away without saying another word, and nobody followed her this time. The girl stayed where she was, holding her father's uniform close, and even though the sadness had not disappeared, it no longer felt heavy, it felt like something that had finally been understood. The people around her were no longer strangers, they were witnesses to something deeper than humiliation, they were witnesses to quiet dignity, and sometimes that is the most powerful justice of all.